She tapped her folder. Twice. That's all. A small signal, invisible to everyone, except the one man trained to see it. Princess Charlotte didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't even step back when Trump crossed the line inside Buckingham Palace, smiling, surrounded by cameras, acting like it was harmless. But Sergeant Rowan Hale saw the signal, and when he moved, the entire corridor froze, because what looked like a royal guard breaking protocol was actually something far more powerful. Now, before we show you the exact moment his boots struck marble, and the 4 words from Charlotte that changed everything, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Tap like, hit subscribe, and make sure that bell icon is turned on. Because what happened inside that corridor wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message. There are corridors inside Buckingham Palace that don't make the tourist guides. Quiet galleries meant not for ceremony, but for rhythm, for breathing space between the handshakes, for the crown's younger generation to learn how silence holds just as much power as spectacle. It was in one such hallway, polished pale stone underfoot and winter light slicing through lead-glass windows, that Princess Charlotte walked with the measured composure expected of her. 11 years old, spine straight, chin lifted just enough to show she had learned the weight of eyes, even when there were none. In her hands, she held a slim folder, no crest, no gold lettering, just plain grey, with a magnetic clasp. Inside were annotated maps of 19th century trade routes, part of her personal geography tutorial she'd insisted not be cancelled for the day's diplomatic activity. Her tutor, a tall, dignified woman named Ms. Ellison, walked a respectful step beside her. Trailing them both, precisely 8 paces behind, was Sergeant Rowan Hale, a Coldstream Guard for 15 years. A combat medic in Helmand before that, and the only ceremonial guard ever permitted by the sovereign to maintain active silent duty, while also assigned privately to the princess during non-public corridors of movement. He walked with the posture of a metronome, not rigid, intentional. His red tunic moved with each silent breath. His tall bearskin hat, perfectly centered, swayed with exact alignment. The only sound that accompanied him was the measured click of his boots. Not loud, not echoing, but present. As if the hallway understood it was being protected. Charlotte didn't look back. She didn't need to. Hale had never failed to be there. He knew her movement rhythms, how her shoulders shifted when tired, how her wrist curled inward when something unsettled her. He knew her silence patterns, just as he once memorized enemy routes in southern Afghanistan, by watching, not by asking. The corridor was quiet now, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but respectful. Then, ahead, the sound of polished shoes turning a corner, laughter. 2 voices, American, a bit too casual for this part of the palace. A male voice, theatrical in tone, familiar from news clips. Ms. Ellison's head tilted slightly as they reached the corridor junction. Charlotte adjusted her grip on the folder. Hale's pace didn't change, but his attention did. The routine was about to be broken, and this particular corridor, it had no space for improvisation. The voices grew clearer as they approached the intersection, one deep and drawling, edged with the performative casualness of someone who knew he was being watched, or wanted to be. The other, younger, flatter, an aide trying to keep pace, both literally and diplomatically. Donald Trump turned the corner of the corridor, flanked by 2 men in tailored navy suits, one holding a tablet, the other holding nothing, but scanning everything. He hadn't been scheduled for this wing. The royal programme marked his meeting as concluded, and his escort returned to the diplomatic suite. But schedules were soft in his orbit, and curiosity was harder to corral. He spotted Charlotte immediately. "Ah, there she is," he said, loud enough to carry. "The young royal." Charlotte didn't react. Her hands stayed on her folder. She hadn't broken stride, but her pace did shift, by a fraction, a single step slower, a small recalibration only someone who walked behind her every day would notice. Trump's expression warmed. The kind of practiced smile worn during photo calls, wide enough to be friendly, close enough to feel personal. The two aides flanked him loosely. They hadn't drawn phones yet, but the slight angle of their bodies, the subtle way they positioned themselves off to the side, betrayed intent. They were angling for coverage, organic, candid, optics disguised as spontaneity. "Princess Charlotte," Trump said, louder now as he stepped forward, crossing an invisible line he didn't know existed. But the line was visible, a thin red stripe, barely noticeable against the marble floor, marked the corridor's shift from guest access to restricted clearance. It wasn't theatrical, no rope, no signage, just the kind of detail that meant everything to the people trained to protect what lay beyond. Charlotte stood just inside the restricted boundary. Hale and her tutor were already across it. Trump kept walking. Miss Ellison turned slightly. "Sir," she said, tone calm but firm, "this section isn't on the public." "Oh, it's fine, just saying hello," Trump waved it off. "She's family, right?" Hale registered the breach, exactly 22 inches past the stripe. Still, he held position. Protocol required assessment, not assumption. His orders were clear. No reaction unless the princess requested aid or risk escalated. Charlotte did not move. She didn't answer. Her expression remained still. Trump stopped a few feet in front of her, still smiling, not looming, not aggressive, but something in the corridor changed, like the temperature dropped half a degree. The aides shifted slightly, standing just beyond the stripe, as if aware of the boundary, but unsure whether to enforce it or ignore it. Hale's hand twitched once near his side. Not a flinch, not a signal, an instinct. Charlotte's eyes didn't lift, but her fingers moved, just once. She tapped the side of her folder, 2 fingers, twice. Small, precise, subtle enough to miss. Except one man didn't miss it. The tap was barely audible, more vibration than sound. 2 fingers, twice, against the stiff edge of the folder. Not enough for Ms. Ellison to notice. Not enough for Trump or his aides to register. Not enough for any camera to interpret. But for Sergeant Rowan Hale, it may as well have been a flare fired into the ceiling. He had trained her himself, quietly, discreetly, over months. In the smallest, safest signals a child could give when speech wasn't possible or appropriate. A tug on a sleeve, a press of a fingernail into a palm, and the rarest signal, 2 taps. A request for immediate repositioning. A coded way of saying, "I am uncomfortable, but I cannot show it." Charlotte's hand hovered for half a second after the tap, as though unsure if she'd been too obvious. Her knuckles tightened, thumb tucked inward. A subtle tremor ran across the top of her wrist. Hale saw all of it. His breath slowed, not from fear, but from focus. A soldier's inhale, the kind that precedes movement. Trump, still smiling, stepped half a foot closer. "Charlotte, sweetheart, do you know—" He didn't finish. Because Hale's body shifted, the smallest pivot of a foot. 1 degree of weight transferred onto the ball of his left boot. It was enough to align his center of gravity toward the princess. Charlotte saw it. Her shoulders curled inward just slightly. Not fear, relief. She had been heard. Miss Ellison glanced at Hale, sensing the shift but not the reason. "You're, sir—" He didn't respond. His eyes were locked on Charlotte's fingers. The folder trembled once. A second signal. 2 taps again. Softer, like she was afraid to be seen giving it. Trump reached a hand outward, palm open, the gesture meant to look casual. "I just wanted to say hello." The aides' phones tilted. Not up, not fully, but angled just enough to capture a moment they hoped would look charming, warm, harmless. Charlotte took in a tiny breath that caught in her throat. She didn't step back. She didn't speak. She didn't look up. Instead, she pressed her 2 fingers against the folder's spine and held them there, frozen. For Hale, the meaning was instant and absolute. This was not a request. It was a call. And Sergeant Rowan Hale, a man who had not broken protocol once in almost 2 decades, moved. There was no warning, no shout, no ceremony, only the sound of boots. 2 deliberate steps across stone, sharper than any command. Sergeant Rowan Hale moved. The decision was already made before his muscles fired. He didn't weigh consequences. He didn't calculate optics. He simply acted, because the signal had been given, and a child stood unprotected. Trump's hand was still extended, palm facing downward. The gesture somewhere between a photo-friendly greeting and an adult's attempt to coax attention. But the moment he noticed movement, he paused. The confidence on his face didn't fall, but it blinked. A subtle recognition that something unexpected had entered the frame. The 2 aides glanced up, first at the princess, then at Hale. The guard crossed the restricted red line in precisely 2 strides. Not rushed, not slow, just final. His boots echoed off the marble with such clarity that even Miss Ellison turned sharply. Sergeant Hale? But Hale was already there. He positioned his body between Princess Charlotte and Donald Trump with geometric precision, not touching her, not raising arms, simply existing as an immovable barrier. His posture didn't scream. It didn't need to. Trump lowered his hand mid-gesture, expression tightening just slightly. Not offense, but confusion. "Is something the matter here?" he asked, voice loud enough to echo slightly in the corridor's vaulted ceiling. Hale said nothing. His eyes didn't even flicker in Trump's direction. His focus was entirely forward-facing, gaze locked on the middle distance, a stance of ceremonial readiness, sharpened into something colder. He lifted his left foot half an inch and reset his stance, a move imperceptible to most, but deeply understood by palace staff. He was on post. Charlotte remained behind him, half shielded by his frame. She hadn't stepped back, hadn't spoken. Her hand still held the folder, but her fingers had dropped from the signal. Hale's hand twitched once near his waist, the faintest adjustment, not near a weapon, not defensive, just ready. The corridor changed. Even the aides, sharp, trained, pre-briefed on protocol, suddenly felt the gravity of the moment. Their phones, subtly angled for candid optics, now lowered in their palms. Neither had the nerve to raise them again. Miss Ellison stepped forward, her voice quiet. "Sergeant, is this sanctioned?" Still no reply, because sanction wasn't the point, recognition was. Charlotte's eyes, still cast down, finally blinked once to slow and even, and then her small voice, barely audible, floated upward behind Hale. "He's not supposed to be here." That was all, and it was enough. Trump's expression shifted, not toward anger, but calculation. That businessman's flicker behind the eyes, trying to assess whether this was optics, overreach, or something worse. He pulled his hand back gently, adjusting his blazer with the casual precision of someone pretending not to have been blocked. "Well," he chuckled, "she doesn't look too bothered to me." Still, Hale did not move. The guard's back was straight, shoulders squared beneath the red tunic, left foot slightly angled. A classic defense posture, subtle enough to pass for neutral unless you knew what to look for. Trump took a half step to the side, angling his body to catch Charlotte's line of sight. "Charlotte," he said, light and coaxing, "I just wanted to say hello. I think we met once at Balmoral." Hale shifted with him. Exactly one pivot step. Exactly in place. Charlotte remained obscured. Trump's lips parted again. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the corridor itself felt tighter now, like the air had shrunk. Maybe it was the 2 palace stewards who had appeared quietly at the far end, hands clasped behind backs, saying nothing, just watching. One of the aides tried to whisper, "Should we?" But Trump raised one hand slightly, signalling for calm. Ms. Ellison stepped forward, her voice now more direct. "Mr. President, I believe this corridor is part of the secured royal wing. We may want to resume your escort." "No one's being disrespectful here," Trump replied, tone still carefully polite. "I walked a few feet too far, sure, but the girl didn't signal anything, did she?" No one answered. Then his aide, the one holding the tablet, leaned in with a hushed tone. "Sir, she did." Trump turned slightly. "What do you mean?" The aide lowered his voice further. "2 taps, folder, emergency protocol. I saw it on the corner of the screen feed before I locked the lens." Trump blinked, her eyes flicking between Charlotte's head and the guard's back. His voice came quieter now, more calculated. "Really?" The aide just nodded. Trump hesitated. Charlotte's face still hadn't lifted, but her stance had changed. Less frozen, less curled. She was still small behind Hale's form, but her hands no longer trembled. She held the folder like a shield she now knew would be honoured. The red line on the marble, once ignored, now burned like a barrier. Sergeant Hale remained exactly where he stood. He didn't ask for clarification, didn't raise a voice, didn't accuse. He simply stood between a child and a misstep. And somehow that stillness said more than any order ever could. From the far hallway, more footsteps echoed, measured, official. Someone had been alerted. Trump took one step back, not far, but behind the line. The footsteps approached, not with urgency, but with purpose, the way practiced officials move when they already know what they're walking into. Lady Bronwyn Kerr arrived first. Senior equerry to the crown, she wore her authority like a tailored coat, every step measured, every syllable in her voice pre-sifted for impact. Just behind her came Sir Malcolm Avery, Under-Secretary for Internal Conduct, his leather-bound folder tucked against his chest, his expression unreadable. The moment they stepped into the corridor, the atmosphere changed. Not panic, not confrontation, just gravity. Lady Kerr's eyes swept across the scene. The red line, the guard in position, the princess behind him, the still-tilted aides, the former president standing just inside a space he was never meant to enter. "Good afternoon," she said evenly. "I wasn't aware this wing was active for press." Trump straightened slightly. "It wasn't official. We were just walking, saying hello. That's all." She nodded once, slowly. "I see." Sir Malcolm's gaze moved next to Hale. "Sergeant Hale, you're currently out of ceremonial post. Please confirm this movement was intentional." Hale gave a short, precise nod. "Yes, sir." "Cause?" She gave the signal. No further elaboration, no defence, just the truth. Lady Kerr's eyes turned to Charlotte, who remained still behind Hale, her head slightly bowed but no longer retreating. She held the folder to her chest, like it might still echo. "Princess Charlotte," Lady Kerr said softly, stepping closer but maintaining space. "Did you initiate the 2-finger code?" Charlotte didn't look up right away. Then, slowly, her head lifted. Not all the way, but just enough that her words could be heard. "I did." Lady Kerr crouched slightly, her voice lowering. "Can you tell me why, ma'am?" Charlotte hesitated. Her throat worked. She blinked once, then twice. Then, in the kind of voice only a child can carry, equal parts careful and impossibly clear, she said, "I didn't feel safe." The corridor didn't move. Trump shifted slightly, not back, but subtly inward, as if questioning whether he'd been accused of something heavier than he could see. Sir Malcolm turned toward him. "Sir, in light of that statement, we'll ask that you return to your designated escort zone. A staffer will walk you back to the diplomatic suite." Trump raised a hand halfway, palm up. "She's fine. This is not a question of intent," Lady Kerr said gently. "It's a matter of perception and protocol." Trump exhaled through his nose, glancing sideways at the aides. Both were now fully still, cameras off, expressions tight. Sir Malcolm gestured subtly to one of the stewards now flanking the corridor. "Escort only. No further action at this time." Trump nodded once, stiffly. "Understood." He didn't apologize, didn't argue, but he stepped back. Past the line. All the way this time. Lady Kerr looked to Hale and Charlotte, then said nothing else, because what needed saying had already been said. The door to the withdrawing room closed with a soft latch. Heavy wood against carpeted silence. Inside, the lighting was gentle. No chandeliers, no gilded mirrors. Just clean lines, cream-painted walls, and two high-backed chairs beside a narrow table set for tea that would never be poured. This wasn't a room for display. It was a room for clarity. Charlotte sat in one chair, feet not quite touching the ground, folder still clutched in her lap, like armour she hadn't yet been given permission to lower. Her braid had loosened slightly behind her shoulder. Her coat remained buttoned, though the room was warm. Lady Bronwyn Kerr sat across from her, hands resting lightly on her knees. Sir Malcolm Avery stood nearby, silent, a small notepad in hand, but he didn't write anything yet. The room was quiet enough to hear the distant tick of a grandfather clock 3 corridors away. "We're not here to interrogate you, ma'am," Lady Kerr said gently. "You're not in trouble. We just need to understand what you felt." Charlotte's eyes were on her knees. She didn't nod, didn't blink, just breathed, one tight, shallow rhythm at a time. "You did everything right," Lady Kerr added. "Your guard responded. You are safe." That word, safe, seemed to unhook something. Charlotte exhaled once. It caught midway down, and she clenched the folder harder. Then, finally, her voice came, soft, but without the shake that had gripped it earlier. "I don't like the way he looked at me." Lady Kerr tilted her head gently. "Did he say anything inappropriate?" Charlotte shook her head once. "No, he smiled too much, like I was something in a shop window." The words weren't dramatic. They were clinical, observed. Sir Malcolm shifted slightly, finally making a single notation, a check mark, not a sentence. "And that was enough to make you feel unsafe?" Charlotte nodded, firmer this time. "I didn't want to move. I didn't want to be told to smile or answer questions or stand in a photo." "Did he ask you to?" "No, not yet. But I saw him tilt his shoulder. That's when I tapped." "You did that on instinct?" "No," Charlotte said, quietly but clearly. "I did it because Sergeant Hale taught me how." Silence again. But this time it wasn't stiff. It was solemn. Lady Kerr straightened slightly. "We have what we need. Thank you, ma'am." Charlotte looked up. "Is he in trouble?" "Hale?" She nodded. "No," Lady Kerr said softly. "He did his job." A long pause. Then Charlotte asked, almost whispering, "Will I get in trouble for tapping?" Sir Malcolm answered that one, his voice steady, slow. "Ma'am, if you ever feel that signal might be necessary, it's necessary." Charlotte breathed out, this time deeper, like her lungs were finally remembering how to fill. "Good," she said. Lady Kerr rose to her feet, brushing her coat back into place. "You can stay here a moment. Take your time. When you're ready, we'll have someone walk you back to your suite." Charlotte nodded once. Lady Kerr and Sir Malcolm stepped out, closing the door behind them. Outside in the corridor, Hale remained posted, exactly where he'd been since the incident began, back to the door, eyes forward, hands folded precisely behind his lower back. Lady Kerr paused beside him. "She spoke," she said. Hale didn't turn. "Understood." "She said 4 words." He didn't ask which. He didn't need to, but she said them anyway. "I didn't feel safe." A side chamber just off the corridor had already been prepared, not as punishment, not as interrogation, but as standard protocol. When a ceremonial guard breaks post, a report is required, even when he does everything right. Sergeant Rowan Hale stood near the window. He had not removed his bearskin hat. His gloved hands remained at rest against his lower back, fingers interlaced with calm precision. The faint afternoon sun lit one side of his uniform, catching the crimson fabric and dull gold buttons in muted reflection. Sir Malcolm entered with a closed folder. Lady Kerr followed but did not sit. Hale turned only when addressed. "Sergeant Hale," Sir Malcolm began, "please confirm for the record. The movement you undertook in Corridor G5 was in response to a visual signal?" "Yes, sir," Hale said, voice level. "Describe the signal." 2 taps, 2 fingers, top edge of folder, paused, then repeated. Duration consistent with Princess's pre-established distress code. Were you confident in your interpretation? Hale didn't hesitate. Without doubt. Sir Malcolm made a single note. Describe the context, positioning, timing, movement. Hale answered like he'd rehearsed it, not because he'd practiced this, but because he had trained for every possibility. His recall was surgical. Princess was stationary, holding folder. Mr. Trump crossed the restricted line 6 seconds prior, approached to within 4 feet, extended hand. Princess did not respond. Issued first tap, delayed second signal, confirmed intentionality. Proximity created visual concern. Did Mr. Trump speak? He initiated a greeting. Tone was casual, volume was elevated, likely for effect. His aides maintained partial recording stances, but ceased when I repositioned. Did you believe she was in physical danger? No, sir. So why did you move? Hale paused. Not because he was unsure, but because this answer didn't require numbers. I've seen children freeze, he said quietly. Not scream, not run, just hold still and hope someone notices. Lady Kerr's expression didn't change. Sir Malcolm looked up from the page. And you noticed? Yes, sir. Was there any precedent for this specific breach? Not in my detail, but the code was created for precisely this kind of moment. Sir Malcolm clicked his pen once softly. Did you raise your voice? No, sir. Did you touch the princess? No, sir. Did you threaten or confront Mr. Trump? No, sir. I placed myself between them. That was the extent of my action. Lady Kerr finally spoke. If asked to do it again, I'd move faster. Neither official spoke for a moment. Then Sir Malcolm closed the folder with a soft snap. Your written account will be appended to the internal record. There will be no formal consequence. You may resume your post. Understood, sir. Hale turned without ceremony and stepped back toward the hallway. Lady Kerr lingered for just a breath. You gave her space, she said quietly. Hale paused. That's all she needed. Then he was gone, back into the corridor, the light, the silence. A soldier returned not to glory, but to stillness. The corridor had emptied just slightly. Not abandoned, just quiet again. No tension, no voices. Only the echo of leather soles and the faint hush of palace stewards returning to assigned posts. Trump stood near the same red line he'd crossed earlier, though now with a slight lean toward the wall. His aides hovered behind him, no longer posturing for cameras, their expressions more guarded than before. The atmosphere had cooled not because of confrontation, but because of finality. Sir Malcolm approached without fanfare. A single steward flanked him, clipboard in hand, waiting for nothing. Mr. Trump, Sir Malcolm said plainly, for the remainder of your stay, your movement will be restricted to escorted diplomatic pathways only. This includes any private corridors or education wings, which are off-limits without written clearance. Trump nodded once, lips pressed together. I understand. You may continue with your scheduled engagements, Sir Malcolm continued. But all informal contact with the royal children is to be avoided unless expressly invited and accompanied. Trump's reply was slower this time. Understood. There was no rebuttal, no complaint, just a small exhale through the nose, the kind that didn't concede guilt, but recognized he'd misread the room. One of his aides leaned forward. Should we issue any clarification for the press team? Sir Malcolm didn't blink. There's nothing to clarify. Lady Kerr appeared beside him, hands clasped neatly in front of her. This matter remains internal, she said. No statements will be made. We consider the matter closed. Trump nodded again. Of course. A steward stepped forward, gesturing toward the corridor's south exit. This way, sir. Trump adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his blazer, and walked, no longer with the casual weight he carried before, but with something stiffer behind the shoulders. As he passed the spot where Charlotte had stood, he glanced once, not back, but sideways. His eyes didn't search for her. He didn't speak, and then he was gone, swallowed into the quieter wing of the palace. No headlines, no cameras, no statement. Just a silent red line on the floor, still drying under the filtered winter light. Sir Malcolm turned to Lady Kerr. "I'll log the restricted movement order within the hour." She nodded. "I'll speak with Charlotte's security team." Neither of them acknowledged Hale, who now stood 20 feet down the hall, motionless, posted, eyes ahead. Because nothing needed to be said. He had already drawn the line, and made it hold. The corridor had settled again, not just quiet, still, as if the palace itself had absorbed the day's weight and now stood in silent agreement that nothing further was required. Sergeant Rowan Hale resumed his position near the eastern archway, exactly where he'd been stationed before the first sound of foreign shoes broke the calm. His boots were squared, his gloves reset, his shoulders rolled back into their perfect frame. If not for the slight shift in breath, no one would have known anything had ever happened. He didn't look toward the doors. He didn't scan for Charlotte. He simply waited. The sound came minutes later. Soft footfalls over the marble. Deliberate, light, steady. Princess Charlotte appeared at the far end, her tutor trailing respectfully behind, carrying the now closed grey folder beneath one arm. She had changed her coat. This one was navy. Her hair had been re-braided. And though the hall was long and lined with silhouettes, she walked with ease, not afraid, not hiding. She passed 2 stewards. They bowed slightly. She didn't break stride. And then, without pausing, she came to where Hale stood. She didn't speak, didn't stop. But as she passed him, just for a moment, she turned her head. Their eyes met. Hers steady, calm, a little red around the edges, but dry now. She gave a nod. Tiny, almost imperceptible, a child's version of a salute, but it said more than 1,000 thank yous ever could. Hale dipped his head once in return, solemn, sharp, precise. Then she walked on. Her tutor followed in silence. They disappeared around the corner toward the private stairs. Hale did not turn to watch. He didn't need to. The nod was enough. And in that moment, the corridor felt not just protected, but whole. Should a royal guard ever break protocol, if it means honouring a silent cry for help, should a child's private signal override a foreign leader's intentions? Let us know what you think in the comments. We read everyone. And if you believe tradition must always stand beside integrity, tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who understands that silence can be the loudest form of protection. One of our other Royal Guard stories is already waiting for you on screen. Watch it next. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with a brand new story.